I'm not answering the question. I think it's complex.
We've got 3 more.
Thanks. I also haven't read the book, so I won't really ask a question about its content, but what stands out is its omission. The first thing you do when you pick up a new book is you turn around and you read the back cover. And what I see on the back cover is the Western Hemisphere. Now, Indian Ocean Studies has of course come a long way in the past 20 years, and this book makes a valuable contribution, but it's subtitled Shaping the Global South, of course, not the Indian Ocean. So I'm interested to know why the Western Hemisphere, and particularly Latin America, why scholarship has been so silent in this regard. I mean, it's extraordinary when you think of our shared histories in slavery, in nation-making, in empire. What can we learn from cultural studies between South America and Africa?
I think that's the next volume. I mean, the front of the book is India and South Africa. It's interesting because I hadn't really noticed the back.
I think one of them was just blocked it out completely.
Thanks. I haven't read the book, but I plan to buy it right now, being a recent immigrant from India into South Africa. But thinking about South Africa and India, the first thing I remember, not as a sociologist at UCT, but as an Indian, is this play I watched this time when I was in Delhi. It was called The Coolie Odyssey, and it was being played at a very big theatre in Delhi. And unfortunately or fortunately, the only token black African man in that was playing the role of a monkey. And all the audience started laughing as soon as he came on stage. And which makes me realize that one thing that hit me as soon as I arrived into South Africa is that
It's been a massive technical challenge.
I can do it. So one of the things that hit me when I arrived into South Africa is that almost everyone I met has this very nuanced, political, everyday understanding of race. While people I interact with, including me, when I was in India, there's almost like this denial of race. There is no race discourse. I haven't read the book, but I'm wondering if there is somebody or you who have written about it or talked about it, the difference in which race discourse in South Africa and India.
Thank you. I think that's an absolutely critical and key question, because I think, especially as this idea of the global south takes hold, it's precisely these sorts of issues that are going to become the most pressing. And I realized when I first went to India some time back, I realized I was incredibly naive. And of course, you don't have to go terribly far in India before you completely find this view of Africa as the dark continent. It's almost routine. And people sort of looking at me rather pityingly because I came from Africa, and then almost followed very quickly by a diasporic idea, and they'd go, well, where do you originally come from, and when are you going back? That was the sort of mindset. And I think it's completely a critical area that, as you say, is unspoken about and extremely uneasy. And there's a very important work starting to be done by Antoinette Bergman, who is a major sort of historian, a kind of post-colonial historian of British Empire. And she's starting to look a lot at issues of Africans in India, and the communities of East African students, soccer players in Nigerian soccer players in Bengal. And also I think it's really important to start uncovering the history of African groups in India, political exiles, travellers, all of that. But also to, as you say, to start dealing with that as a, to surface the kinds of thinking about Africa and race that do exist in India that are completely sort of unspoken about. And I think that work is starting to be done. And of course, it's an extremely complicated and interesting history because it's going back to what Ari said right at the beginning. It's also as well about the interpenetrating histories of race and caste, which are actually often constructed in relation to each other. Ideas of tribe also circulate throughout the British Empire and are used in different ways to construct tribals in India, and that discourse, circulates. But I think it's an absolutely key issue that you raise. Thank you. I can't, in terms of the specifics that you're asking, which is there an Indian writer talking about Africa in a sort of gosh kind of way? I haven't really encountered anybody. There are certainly, there is a novel done actually in the 50s about African students in Delhi. So there are those sorts of I think there's also a very interesting project to be done on the genealogies of African studies in India, because African studies as a discipline in India exists only as international relations or security studies, which is a very interesting and telling his history I think to be written there. It's not about South Africa, but I think if you're interested in the Gosh, the really fantastic writer is Eng Seng Ho, who looks at the Hadrami diaspora from Yemen, and is a very influential voice in thinking about the Indian Ocean. And it makes, I think, a really important point that the Indian Ocean is not primarily a site of the interaction of colonizer and colonized, the powerful and the powerless. Rather, it's often the old diasporas in the Indian Ocean encountering imperial diasporas, because empires are diasporas backed by a state. And so he then looks at the encounter of the Hadramis with the various European imperialisms that come in. And because the Hadramis are Sayyids, they have a very ambitious religious program, which is as ambitious as, for example, British imperialism.
I'll just address your more cynical questions. How is this different? It's interesting because we start off saying if you read any newspaper today, you will come up with India. It's exactly what you're saying. The Economist, any one of these will highlight these linkages. But what we were saying in this book is that these are the not common points. We don't look at the iconic leaders or just the main liberation movements of the two places. We look at the less commonly known things. We talk, the Lascars, the Ghanaian printing press, the communist parties, the democratic deepening, all these things that are often overlooked by the mainstream understanding, and the Bollywood films. That's one of the other cultural circulations. We talked about Schuster in India. Bollywood in South Africa is also extraordinary. It's another area that didn't feature here, but could feature.
Can I just add one thing? I think also the importance of this project is about trying to profile Africa in the Indian Ocean, because it's a very old, rich and venerable traditions of scholarship on the Indian Ocean, but they almost always elide Africa. And so I think the really important thing is about how intellectually do we project serious questions about Africa into that arena.
So, thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. It's the beginning of the conversation. There will be many more. Let me point to three that need perhaps further exploration. I spent an inordinate amount of time in Delhi, and all the people of my generation, academics and so on, circles I meet, speak about how they learned about South Africa in the 60s and 70s through history books, and how important that was in terms of their own political formation. But can you imagine, though, the picture that was painted of South Africa and the degrees of discrimination and so on that were going on there? So history books might be a very interesting way of looking at the construction that's happening. Second thing is that the answers to those questions are there. They haven't been asked. The archive is there. So it's amazing how more and more stuff emerges once the questions are asked. Okay, it's very difficult, and I've seen some kind of degree of negotiation for the old archives to be opened that needs to happen in various spaces in India, but they're there. It's there. And thirdly, that there have been movements from this continent. Quite vast ones in numbers. Even if we go back to the Oxford history of Cambridge history of Africa, the Harrison's thing on movement of slaves, and it stops. So-called mountain people in Kerala, tribe defined by the colonial administration, have song and oral structure that are very similar to Mozambicans. So they ran away, basically, towards the mountains because of whatever was going on. So it's just asking the right questions, I suppose, and the conversation is vital, important, and we're waiting for volume 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Enjoy the book.
Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks, of course, especially to Michelle and to Isabel for being with us here from Far Gauteng.